Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History World. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd like to ask one small favor. If this channel becomes a place you enjoy returning to, a quiet corner where slow storytelling helps you relax, unwind, and gently drift towards sleep, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support truly helps this little history community grow, and it allows me to keep creating peaceful stories for nights just like this. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, perhaps pull up a warm blanket, and let the worries of today slowly fade into the background. Tonight, we're stepping back into America's Gilded Age, where unimaginable wealth built some of the most spectacular homes the country had ever seen. Imagine that it is long past midnight, the grand ballroom is finally empty. The music has faded away, the last carriage has disappeared through the front gates, and the glittering chandeliers have been dimmed beyond the heavy velvet curtains. The gardens lie silent beneath the moonlight, while inside the mansion dozens of fireplaces glow softly in the darkness. Somewhere along a distant hallway, a clock quietly strikes the hour. Servants move silently through hidden corridors, preparing the house for another night, while upstairs the wealthiest families in America settle beneath embroidered blankets inside bedrooms, larger than many entire homes. But what was it really like to sleep in one of these extraordinary mansions? Was it as luxurious and peaceful as we imagine, or did life behind those magnificent walls come with its own unexpected discomforts, strange nighttime sounds and hidden routines? Tonight we'll quietly wander through candlelit corridors, beautifully decorated bedrooms, secret servant staircases, and peaceful moonlit gardens to discover what an ordinary night's sleep was truly like during the fascinating Gilded Age. So, take a slow breath, settle into your favorite sleeping position, and let's quietly step back in time together. Imagine opening your eyes in the middle of the night inside one of the grandest mansions of America's Gilded Age. Somewhere beyond the heavy curtains, the city has gone quiet. Carriage wheels have faded from the streets, and the enormous house seems to be asleep, yet lying beneath embroidered blankets in a room filled with carved furniture, velvet upholstery, polished wood, and expensive paintings did not necessarily mean enjoying a perfect night of rest. During the late 19th century, roughly from the 1870s through the turn of the 20th century, America's wealthiest families built extraordinary homes designed to display fortunes created through railroads, steel, banking, mining, manufacturing, and trade. From Fifth Avenue townhouses in New York to sprawling estates in Newport and enormous country residences beyond the cities. These houses could contain dozens of bedrooms, private sitting rooms, dressing rooms, libraries, ballrooms, conservatories, servants' quarters, and corridors long enough to make a midnight walk feel like a small journey. Visitors entering such a mansion during daylight might have been overwhelmed by marble staircases, chandeliers, imported carpets, gilded mirrors, carved fireplaces, and walls covered with silk or elaborate wallpaper. But nighttime transformed these impressive buildings. Once the guests departed and the lamps were lowered, the mansion became darker, colder, quieter, and considerably stranger. For the wealthy people sleeping in the finest bedrooms, bedtime itself could involve a surprisingly elaborate routine. A fashionable bedroom was rarely treated as simply a place containing a bed. It was a private world, often arranged according to the tastes and social position of its occupant. Wealthy husbands and wives might maintain separate bedrooms or adjoining suites, particularly among families who could afford enough space to make privacy a luxury. A woman's suite might include a bedroom, dressing room, bathroom, and sitting room, while her husband could have his own rooms nearby. Separate sleeping arrangements did not automatically indicate an unhappy marriage. Among the wealthy, personal rooms could represent status, comfort, privacy, and the ability to maintain individual routines. A person who had spent the evening attending an elaborate dinner or entertaining guests might finally withdraw upstairs only after hours of social obligations. Formal dinners could stretch late into the evening, followed by conversation, music, cards, dancing, or drinks. By the time the household began preparing for sleep, servants might already have spent hours making sure the bedrooms were ready. Long before their employers entered, chambermaids could turn down beds, arrange nightclothes, replenish water, clean wash basins, empty waste containers, tend fires, close curtains, and make certain everything appeared effortless. The wealthy sleeper saw a peaceful room waiting for them, but that peacefulness depended on invisible labor. In winter, warmth was one of the greatest concerns. Central heating existed in increasingly sophisticated forms during the Gilded Age, especially in expensive modern houses, but heating a gigantic mansion evenly was difficult. Many bedrooms still depended partly on fireplaces, radiators, hot water systems, or combinations of different technologies. A roaring fireplace could make a bedroom comfortable before bedtime, yet the fire gradually weakened during the night unless someone tended it. The farther a bedroom stood from the main heating system, the more noticeable the cold could become. Heavy curtains, thick carpets, upholstered furniture, bed hangings, blankets, and layered clothing were therefore practical as well as decorative. On particularly cold nights, servants might warm beds before their occupants entered them. A bed warmer, traditionally a covered metal pan containing hot coals, had been used for generations, although newer heating methods and hot water bottles increasingly offered alternatives. The idea was simple. Nobody with enormous wealth wanted to climb into sheets that felt like ice. Yet once comfortably beneath the blankets, another problem appeared. Gilded Age mansions were full of noises. Houses built from timber stone, metal pipes, heating systems, and enormous quantities of furniture did not become completely silent at night. Floors creaked as temperatures changed, pipes knocked, radiators hissed, wind pressed against windows. Chimneys produced faint draughts and occasional sounds. Tree branches scraped exterior walls. Somewhere downstairs, a servant might close a door or carry something along a corridor. Anyone waking suddenly at 2 a.m. could find themselves staring into a dark room while listening to an enormous building quietly groan around them. Gas lighting made nighttime particularly distinctive. Electricity was spreading rapidly among wealthy households during the late 19th century, and affluent families were among the first able to install impressive electrical systems. But the transition was gradual. Some mansions used gas, some electricity, and some temporarily used both. Gas fixtures produced warm illumination but also heat and combustion products, and poorly managed gas systems carried obvious risks. Electric lighting seemed astonishingly modern, though early electrical installations could themselves be unfamiliar and occasionally unreliable. A wealthy guest visiting an electrified mansion might even be uncertain about operating the new switches. Before dependable electric lights became ordinary, waking at night meant reaching for a candle, lamp, or calling for assistance. Darkness inside a huge mansion could be remarkably complete, without modern streetlights shining strongly through every window. Corridors beyond the bedroom might disappear into shadow. Imagine opening a bedroom door and seeing a hallway lined with portraits, statues, decorative armor, enormous mirrors, and heavy furniture, all barely visible in the trembling light of a candle. The same decorations that looked magnificent during the afternoon could appear unsettling at midnight. Even wealthy adults accustomed to these surroundings could be startled by unexpected shapes and sounds. Bedrooms themselves were packed with objects by modern standards. Victorian and Gilded Age interior design often celebrated abundance. A fashionable room could contain patterned wallpaper, framed pictures, decorative screens, upholstered chairs, tables, clocks, porcelain objects, books, rugs, trunks, wardrobes, dressing tables, mirrors, and elaborate curtains. Beds were substantial pieces of furniture, sometimes carved from dark wood and elevated enough to require effort to enter. Mattresses varied considerably. Wealthy households could afford high-quality mattresses filled with materials such as horsehair, cotton, wool, or combinations of carefully prepared stuffing. Metal springs became increasingly common during the 19th century and could provide greater support than older mattress systems. Yet even an expensive mattress would not necessarily feel like a modern luxury bed. Mattresses required regular turning, airing, beating, and maintenance, tasks normally handled by servants. Bedding also demanded enormous labor. Sheets, pillowcases, blankets, quilts, and decorative covers had to be washed without the convenience of modern automatic machines. The crisp sheets waiting for a millionaire at bedtime represented hours of work performed elsewhere in the house. Behind the luxurious bedrooms existed another sleeping world entirely. Servants often lived within the mansion, but their rooms were usually placed where wealthy residents and guests would encounter them as little as possible. Attic floors, upper stories, basement areas, back corridors, and service wings formed a hidden architecture that allowed the household to function. A mansion might appear calm because servants travelled through separate staircases and passageways designed specifically to keep domestic labour out of sight. While the master bedroom could be enormous and richly decorated, a maid sleeping several floors above might occupy a small plain room with basic furniture and limited heating. Servants frequently worked long days, rising before the family and remaining available until after social events ended. Their sleep could therefore be shorter and less predictable. A late dinner party might keep footmen, kitchen workers, maids, and other employees awake well beyond their normal hours, while morning duties still waited. Some servants were expected to respond if called during the night. Bell systems connected family rooms with service areas, allowing wealthy occupants to summon assistance without walking through the house. Pulling a cord or pressing a button could activate a bell somewhere in the servants' area, identifying the room requesting attention. For the person lying beneath expensive blankets, this was convenient. For the servant awakened by the bell, it meant sleep could end instantly. The mansion therefore contained two very different experiences of nighttime, one designed around comfort and another designed around providing that comfort. Bathrooms were another sign of changing technology. By the later Gilded Age, the richest houses could possess elaborate indoor plumbing at a time when many ordinary Americans still relied on far simpler arrangements. Wealthy bathrooms could contain porcelain tubs, sinks, toilets, hot and cold running water, marble surfaces and impressive fixtures. But plumbing standards were evolving, and early systems were not always as dependable or odor-free as modern ones. In older houses or bedrooms without convenient plumbing, chamber pots and washstands remained familiar objects. A person waking during the night did not necessarily walk down a brightly illuminated hallway into a modern bathroom. But the deeper you move into the nighttime world of a Gilded Age mansion, the more you begin to notice that sleep was shaped by dozens of small routines that modern life has largely erased. The evening did not simply end when someone felt tired. In an extremely wealthy household, the transition from public life to private sleep could unfold gradually, almost ceremonially. Imagine the final guests leaving after midnight. The front doors close behind them, the last carriage disappears down the drive, and suddenly a house that had been filled with conversation, music, footsteps, laughter, and the movement of servants becomes strangely calm. Candles are extinguished, gas flames are lowered, electric lights, if the mansion possesses them, disappear room by room. Servants begin collecting glasses, straightening chairs, protecting valuable objects, closing shutters, checking fireplaces, and preparing the public rooms for the following morning. Upstairs, the family retreats into private chambers that visitors may rarely see. The transformation is remarkable. A mansion designed to impress hundreds of people during an evening reception becomes a collection of individual rooms occupied by tired people removing uncomfortable clothes and preparing to disappear beneath blankets. For wealthy women in particular, getting ready for bed could take time. Hairstyles fashionable during the late 19th century might require pins, combs, extensions, and careful arrangement. And dismantling everything at night could involve assistance from a personal maid. Jewellery had to be removed and safely stored. Dresses containing delicate fabrics and elaborate construction needed careful handling rather than simply being thrown over a chair. Corsets and other structured undergarments were removed. Hair was brushed, the face and hands washed, and nightclothes put on. The maid might then prepare clothing for the following morning before finally withdrawing. Wealth therefore turned bedtime into something supported by another person's work. The mistress of the house could climb into bed while someone else quietly collected the clothing, organized the room, and made certain everything necessary for the night remained within reach. A wealthy gentleman might rely on a valet in much the same way. Evening clothes were removed and inspected, shoes taken away for cleaning, personal belongings arranged, and tomorrow's clothing prepared. The valet understood details of his employer's wardrobe that few other people knew. He might know exactly which waistcoat belonged with a particular suit, which shoes were preferred for certain occasions, how a coat should be brushed, and where personal objects were kept. This relationship could become remarkably intimate, despite the enormous social distance between employer and servant. At bedtime, when the formal appearance of wealth was being dismantled piece by piece, servants saw their employers in moments hidden from the outside world. Then the bedroom door closed, and privacy finally arrived. Yet privacy itself had a different meaning in a household containing dozens of employees. A person could technically be alone while knowing that servants were always somewhere nearby. A bell cord beside the bed represented this strange combination of privacy and dependence. If something was needed, assistance could be summoned. Perhaps more water was required. Perhaps the fire had gone too low. Perhaps someone felt ill. Perhaps a noise had been heard downstairs. Pull the bell, and somewhere in the service area a servant might be expected to respond. For the wealthy resident, this created extraordinary convenience. For servants, it meant that the mansion never entirely stopped demanding attention. Their workday could stretch according to the habits of the people they served. If the family stayed awake until 1 in the morning, some employees stayed awake too. If guests remained until 2, servants remained later still to restore order. Yet the following morning did not necessarily begin later, simply because the previous evening had ended late. Household machinery had to start again, breakfast had to appear, fires needed attention, rooms needed cleaning, water needed heating, clothing needed preparation. The mansion's effortless elegance was created by people whose own sleep could be sacrificed to maintain it. If you climbed the back staircase toward the servants' sleeping quarters, the contrast could be immediate. Decorative richness often diminished as you entered. Areas guests were never intended to see. Carpets became simpler or disappeared. Walls became plain. Corridors narrowed. Furniture became functional rather than impressive. The architecture itself communicated social hierarchy. The best rooms belonged to the family and important visitors. Servants occupied whatever spaces could be fitted around the requirements of the household. In some mansions, attic rooms became sleeping quarters for female domestic servants, while male servants might occupy rooms elsewhere, depending on the design of the property. These rooms could become extremely warm during summer, because heat rose through the building, while winter could bring the opposite problem if heating was inadequate. A maid who had spent the day maintaining fireplaces and arranging comfortable bedrooms for others might return to a much colder room of her own. She might possess a narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest, a chair, and a few personal belongings. There was little resemblance between this space and the luxurious suite downstairs, even though both existed beneath the same roof, and this difference was not accidental. Gilded Age domestic architecture frequently attempted to separate service from display. Servants moved through back staircases, basement passages, service elevators, pantries and corridors, so that wealthy residents could experience the results of labour without constantly witnessing the labour itself. At night, however, these hidden pathways became especially important. Imagine being a new servant walking through them during your first week. The family staircase might be grand and beautifully illuminated, but you are expected to use a narrow back staircase that twists between floors. The lights are low. You know that dozens of rooms surround you, many containing expensive objects you are responsible for protecting. Every floorboard seems louder because everyone else is asleep. A clock suddenly strikes the hour somewhere below, and the sound travels upward through the stairwell. You continue walking because there is still work to finish before you can sleep. The clocks themselves were an important part of the mansion's nighttime atmosphere. Wealthy homes often contained numerous clocks, mantel clocks, carriage clocks, tall clocks, bedroom clocks, and elaborate decorative pieces. Some chimed the hour or quarter hour. During the day, these sounds disappeared. beneath conversation and activity. At night they became much more noticeable. One clock might begin striking midnight, followed seconds later by another clock elsewhere in the house. For someone struggling to sleep, the passing hours could become impossible to ignore. 12 strikes, then 1, then 2. Long before smartphones illuminated bedside tables, sleepless people still knew the frustration of watching the night disappear while rest refused to come. Reading could provide an escape. A bedside candle or lamp allowed someone to open a novel, newspaper, devotional work, or correspondence. Although reading in bed carried practical concerns when open flames were involved. Falling asleep beside a burning candle was dangerous, and household advice frequently emphasized careful management of fire. Wealthy homes contained enough combustible material to make this concern entirely reasonable. Curtains, carpets, upholstered furniture, wooden paneling, books, bedding, clothing, and wallpaper surrounded almost every flame. A forgotten candle could transform a magnificent bedroom into an emergency. Gas lighting brought different worries. Gas escaping from faulty fixtures could create unpleasant smells and dangerous conditions. The arrival of electricity therefore seemed almost magical. Instead of carrying a flame through a dark room, a person could eventually produce light with a switch, but early electrical systems were new enough to inspire fascination and uncertainty. Some people distrusted electricity, while others eagerly installed it as evidence that their homes belonged to the future. The richest households could experiment with new technology years before it became ordinary for the broader population. A Gilded Age mansion might therefore contain an extraordinary mixture of centuries. In one room stood furniture inspired by European aristocratic styles, hundreds of years old. In another, an electric bulb represented the technological future. A servant might carry a traditional candle past electrical wiring hidden inside the walls. A horse-drawn carriage waited outside while a telephone sat inside the house. A chamber pot could exist only a short distance from an advanced private bathroom. Sleeping in such a mansion meant living directly inside this transition between older domestic habits and modern convenience. The telephone added another new possibility. The outside world could reach the mansion without physically arriving at the door. Early telephones were not placed beside every bed as modern phones might be, but their presence changed communication nonetheless. An urgent message could reach the household faster than before. Doctors could potentially be contacted more quickly. Business information could arrive unexpectedly. Technology slowly reduced the mansion's isolation from the outside world, although nighttime remained far quieter than anything most people experience today. And as the hours moved deeper into the night, there were other details of life inside a Gilded Age mansion that became noticeable, only when the activity of the day had disappeared. During daylight, the house was constantly performing a purpose. Doors opened for visitors, servants crossed rooms carrying trays, carriages arrived outside. Letters were delivered, meals were announced, and conversations travelled from drawing rooms to libraries and dining rooms. But after midnight, the mansion became almost entirely architectural. Its enormous ceilings, long passages, thick walls, staircases, alcoves, and decorative rooms suddenly seemed much larger because so few people were moving through them. A hallway that required only a few seconds to cross during the afternoon could feel considerably longer when illuminated by a single lamp. Every doorway seemed darker, Every piece of furniture created a shadow. The soft ticking of a clock that nobody noticed during dinner could suddenly become the loudest sound in the room. For someone sleeping in the house for the first time, perhaps a guest invited for a weekend, learning the geography of the mansion could itself be challenging. The guest might remember the grand staircase and the drawing room perfectly, but become uncertain about which corridor led back to the bedroom after everyone retired. Large mansions were often deliberately complicated because different parts of the household were designed for different purposes. Family members, guests, servants, deliveries, food, laundry and fuel could all move through different routes. The architecture helped maintain the illusion that domestic work happened almost magically. A guest could sit down for dinner without watching dishes travel from the kitchen. A wealthy woman could enter a perfectly arranged bedroom without seeing the maid carrying coal or water through the service passage. At night, these separate routes continued to exist, creating a building within a building. Behind beautiful walls and decorative doors might be narrow passages used almost entirely by employees. A servant responding to a nighttime bell could leave a small room, descend a back staircase, cross a service corridor, and appear quietly near the family bedroom without ever entering the grand public spaces. The wealthy residents experienced the mansion from the front. The servants experienced it from behind. Both groups lived in the same building, yet they could know entirely different versions of it. This became particularly obvious around the kitchen. By bedtime, the enormous kitchen that had produced an elaborate dinner was entering the final stage of cleaning. Gilded Age entertaining could involve multiple courses, expensive ingredients, complicated sauces, desserts, wines, and formal service. Preparing such meals required cooks, kitchen maids, scullery workers, butlers, footmen, and other employees, depending on the household. Long after the diners had finished eating, someone still had to clean what remained. Pots had to be scrubbed, dishes had to be washed, silver required careful handling, food had to be stored safely, fires needed to be managed, floors and work surfaces had to be restored for the next day. The family upstairs might already be discussing how pleasant the evening had been while the people who made it possible were still cleaning below. Eventually the kitchen became quiet too, although it was often among the first parts of the house to awaken again. Before sunrise, breakfast preparations could begin. Coal or wood might be carried in. Fires were revived, water heated, bread, eggs, meat, coffee, tea, and other breakfast foods were prepared according to the habits of the household. In especially elaborate houses, family members might expect breakfast to appear with very little awareness of when the work began. The bedroom therefore existed at the end of a chain of nighttime and morning labour stretching through the entire mansion. Even something as simple as waking to a cup of tea beside the bed required someone else to be awake earlier. The morning drink had to be prepared downstairs, carried through the service areas, taken upstairs, and delivered while still warm for the wealthy occupant. It could feel like the natural beginning of the day for the servant, carrying the tray. The day had already begun some time ago. Sleeping late was itself a privilege. In fashionable society, especially after evenings of entertainment, wealthy adults might not follow the early schedules associated with agricultural or working class life. If a family had remained awake until well after midnight, breakfast could be flexible, particularly in houses where guests were staying. Servants, however, could not simply remain asleep because the family intended to rise late. The house needed to be prepared before anyone important appeared. This created one of the quiet contradictions of luxury. The ability of one person to sleep longer often depended upon another person sleeping less. The bedroom clock might show 9 in the morning when the owner finally opened their eyes, but downstairs, the household had already been functioning for hours. The bed itself represented another enormous amount of hidden work. Modern bedding can be washed by machine, dried automatically, and replaced relatively quickly. In a Gilded Age mansion, maintaining large quantities of household linen was a major operation. Wealthy houses could possess extraordinary collections of sheets, pillowcases, towels, table linens, napkins, and other washable fabrics. Laundry required sorting, soaking, boiling, scrubbing, rinsing, drying, ironing, folding, and storing. Large estates sometimes maintained dedicated laundry buildings or rooms because the work generated heat, steam, and moisture. Laundresses performed physically demanding labor to create the clean white linens associated with respectable households. The beautiful sheet beneath a sleeping millionaire therefore carried a history of work that disappeared once it reached the bedroom. Nobody lying in bed needed to think about the water heated to wash it, the hands that scrubbed it, or the iron that smoothed it. Cleanliness simply appeared. Pillows required attention too. Feather pillows were common among those who could afford them, and bedding could be shaken, aired, brushed, and rearranged. Mattresses needed turning so that where remained even bed frames had to be inspected and cleaned. In earlier generations, bed bugs and other pests had been a persistent household problem across social classes, and wealth did not create magical immunity from insects. Careful cleaning and inspection remained important. Elaborately upholstered rooms actually provided numerous places where dust and insects could hide. Heavy curtains, carpets, padded chairs, fabric wall coverings, decorative bedding, and crowded furniture collected dust far more easily than the simpler interiors favoured in later periods. Servants therefore spent enormous amounts of time brushing, beating, sweeping, wiping, polishing, and airing rooms. The visual richness admired in Gilded Age interiors demanded constant maintenance. Every additional object became another object someone had to clean. A bedroom containing 20 decorative items required more work than a room containing 2. A mansion containing hundreds or thousands of objects created an endless cycle of dusting. This maintenance continued partly because cleanliness was tied closely to social respectability. A wealthy household could not allow an important guest to discover dusty furniture, stained linen, cold water, or an improperly prepared bedroom. The house represented the family. A failure in domestic presentation could become a social embarrassment. Servants therefore worked behind the scenes to make sure the environment appeared naturally perfect. Nighttime was valuable because certain tasks could be performed when family members and visitors were no longer occupying public spaces. Yet some work had to wait until morning because cleaning too loudly could wake the household. This required careful timing. A servant needed to know not merely how to clean a room, but when it could be cleaned without disturbing anyone. Silence became a professional skill. Doors were closed gently, footsteps were controlled, trays were carried carefully. Objects were placed rather than dropped. A good servant was expected to accomplish substantial work while remaining almost invisible and often nearly inaudible. For someone sleeping upstairs, the result was an impression of effortless quiet. The mansion seemed peaceful because other people were deliberately trying not to wake them, but complete silence was impossible. Horses outside could move in their stalls. Carriages returning late could roll over gravel or stone. A door might close unexpectedly. A servant might drop something. A fireplace could crack sharply as a piece of wood shifted. Heating pipes could produce sudden knocks. Water moving through plumbing created unfamiliar sounds, particularly in houses where indoor plumbing was still relatively new. Wind could whistle around architectural details. Rainwater travelled through gutters and downspouts. Birds or small animals occasionally found their way into attics or walls. The enormous structure behaved almost like a living thing. Those accustomed to the house learned its sounds and stopped noticing them. A newcomer might interpret every noise as significant. This difference between familiar and unfamiliar sound could make guest bedrooms surprisingly difficult places to sleep. Even a luxurious mattress did little good if the person lying on it remained alert to every creak. Guests also had to adapt to household etiquette. Visiting a great estate was not equivalent to staying anonymously in a hotel. You were participating in the social world of your hosts. As dawn remained hours away, another fascinating part of sleeping in a gilded age mansion was the rhythm of the seasons. The experience of spending a January night could be entirely different from spending a July night, even inside the very same bedroom. During winter, heavy snow might pile against the windows while icy winds swept across the grounds. The thick stone walls and sturdy construction offered protection, yet they also retained the chill if fires were allowed to fade before retiring. Servants carefully arranged additional blankets, checked fireplaces, and ensured that windows were properly secured against drafts. Even then, it was not unusual for bedrooms to become noticeably cooler by the early hours of the morning. Many people of the period described the sensation of seeing their breath on particularly cold mornings before the fire had been revived. Imagine waking before sunrise, pulling the blankets closer and noticing the room filled with the faint blue light of winter dawn. The polished furniture feels cold to the touch. The marble fireplace has lost much of its warmth. The floor beyond the bedside rug seems almost freezing beneath bare feet. In that moment, even a millionaire appreciated thick wool slippers and a warm dressing gown. Winter also influenced the sounds of the mansion. Snow acted as a natural blanket over the landscape, muffling the outside world. Carriage wheels rolled more softly. Footsteps became quieter, and distant noises almost disappeared beneath fresh snowfall. Inside, however, heating systems worked harder. Radiators clicked as hot water circulated. Fireplaces occasionally cracked as burning logs shifted. Chimneys carried smoke upward into the cold night air. These gentle sounds became part of the background of sleep, almost like a slow conversation between the house and the weather outside. Spring transformed the atmosphere completely. Windows that had remained tightly closed through winter were gradually opened to welcome fresh air. The scent of flowering trees drifted into bedrooms, especially in country estates where gardens had been carefully designed to bloom in succession throughout the season. Wealthy families often invested enormous sums creating landscaped grounds filled with flowering shrubs, roses, climbing vines, ornamental trees, and decorative fountains. Sleeping with an open window during spring meant waking not only to cooler air but also to birdsong echoing through carefully planned gardens. The earliest birds began singing before sunrise, long before anyone in the main bedrooms expected breakfast. Their songs drifted through the curtains, mixing with the distant sounds of gardeners beginning another day's work. For those accustomed to city life, these peaceful country mornings were one of the greatest pleasures of seasonal travel. Summer introduced challenges that even enormous wealth could not completely eliminate. Before electric fans became common, and long before air conditioning existed, hot weather demanded patience. During humid nights, heavy curtains were often tied back to encourage airflow, while windows remained open for as long as weather allowed. Lightweight linen sheets replaced heavier winter bedding. Still, there were evenings when absolutely no breeze reached the bedroom. The air felt still, warm, and heavy. Sleep became difficult, regardless of how luxurious the surroundings appeared. Wealthy families adapted by changing their routines rather than changing the temperature. Evening walks through shaded gardens became popular after dinner. Verandas and terraces remained occupied until late in the evening as families waited for cooler air before retiring. Some bedrooms even contained large manually operated fans or ceiling fans where electricity had been installed, though these were still luxuries unavailable to most households. The sounds of summer were entirely different from winter. Instead of silence, open windows admitted the constant chorus of insects, distant frogs near ponds, rustling leaves, and occasional calls from night birds. Rainstorms arrived suddenly, filling the air with thunder before disappearing just as quickly. Afterward, the smell of wet earth entered the house through open windows, cooling rooms naturally. Wealthy homeowners often considered these scents part of the pleasure of country living. Fresh air was believed to improve health, and sleeping with windows open was encouraged whenever conditions allowed. Autumn brought perhaps the most comfortable sleeping weather of all. Days became cooler, nights pleasantly crisp, and the first small fires of the season returned to bedroom fireplaces. Outside, leaves covered long carriage drives and gardens changed from bright greens to deep gold, crimson and bronze. Even indoors, the atmosphere shifted. Heavy curtains were drawn earlier. As darkness arrived sooner each evening, candles and lamps were lit before dinner. Bedrooms regained their cozy appearance with thicker blankets and richer fabrics. Many people considered autumn the ideal season for comfortable sleep because neither oppressive heat nor severe cold interrupted the night. Another surprisingly important part of nighttime life was the relationship between people and silence. Modern homes are filled with constant mechanical sounds. Refrigerators hum quietly. Heating and cooling systems cycle on and off. Electronics produce faint background noise. Traffic often continues throughout the night. A Gilded Age mansion, despite its enormous size, experienced periods of almost complete stillness. Once the fires settled and the final servant closed a distant door, silence became remarkably deep. At first, this silence could feel peaceful. Then, after several minutes, the smallest sound suddenly became noticeable. A page turning inside a book seemed the movement of bed linen sounded sharper than expected. Even breathing could seem prominent in a quiet bedroom. For many people today, complete silence feels unfamiliar because modern life rarely provides it. Yet 19th century nights often included long stretches without any significant human-made noise at all. The darkness encouraged reflection. People frequently spent a few quiet minutes thinking about the events of the day before finally drifting to sleep. A businessman might replay an important meeting. A young woman might remember conversations from an evening reception. Parents might quietly discuss the future of their children. Elderly family members could reflect upon decades already past. The bedroom became one of the few places where public responsibilities temporarily disappeared. Letters often played a role in these peaceful moments. Many people enjoyed reading personal correspondence before bed. A letter arriving from Europe, another American city, or distant relatives could be treasured for days. Unlike today's instant communication, each letter represented patience. Weeks might pass between messages. Reading one beneath the warm glow of a bedside lamp felt like reopening a small part of someone else's world. Some people replied immediately, writing several pages before finally extinguishing the light. The bedroom desk therefore became another important feature of many private suites. Pens, ink, blotting paper, envelopes, and stationery remained neatly arranged for quiet evening correspondence. Books were equally important companions. Wealthy households often possessed extensive libraries, but many individuals also kept favorite books beside the bed. Historical works, poetry, novels, religious texts, travel journals, biographies, and scientific writings all found their way into private bedrooms. Reading by lamplight was a common way to unwind before sleep, though it required care, because prolonged reading under relatively dim light could tire the eyes. Nevertheless, the absence of electronic entertainment meant books occupied a far more central place in evening life than they do for many people today. Occasionally, sleep itself became interrupted not by discomfort but by nature. Heavy rain drumming against the roof could wake even the deepest sleeper. Thunder echoed through large rooms more dramatically than in smaller houses, while flashes of lightning briefly illuminated every piece of furniture. Portraits hanging on the walls appeared almost alive for an instant before darkness returned. Curtains moved gently in sudden drafts created by changing air pressure. Then everything settled once more into quiet darkness. Storms could make a mansion feel both extraordinarily secure and surprisingly vulnerable at the same time. Thick walls protected those inside, yet the power of nature outside remained impossible to ignore. Fog created another memorable atmosphere, especially in coastal estates. Imagine opening the curtains just before dawn and discovering that the entire landscape beyond the window has disappeared into pale grey mist. Trees become vague silhouettes. Fountains cannot be seen, only heard. Garden paths vanish after a few yards. The mansion itself seems isolated from the rest of the world. On mornings like these, servants moved quietly through corridors carrying lamps, because daylight struggled to penetrate the heavy fog. Breakfast conversations often began with remarks about the weather before plans for the day were adjusted accordingly. One cannot fully understand sleeping in a gilded age mansion without appreciating the importance of privacy. Wealth purchased not only beautiful furniture, but also personal space. A successful industrialist might possess a bedroom larger than the entire apartment occupied by a working-class family. Thick walls reduced noise between rooms. Separate dressing rooms allowed personal belongings to remain hidden. Attached bathrooms were available, eliminated the need to cross public hallways during the night. This privacy was one of luxury's greatest advantages. As the 19th century drew toward its close, another quiet transformation was taking place inside many of these magnificent homes. Technology was changing the way people experienced the night, but the change was gradual rather than sudden. A family could live in a mansion that proudly displayed electric lights in the grand entrance hall, while still relying on candles in certain bedrooms or gas lamps in less frequently used areas. Modern inventions arrived room by room instead of all at once. Because of this, bedtime routines often reflected two different centuries existing under the same roof. A servant might extinguish a candle in one room before walking into another, illuminated by one of the newest electric bulbs. The contrast must have seemed remarkable. For generations, people had accepted darkness as an unavoidable part of night. Now, for the first time, wealthy households could keep rooms brightly illuminated with far less effort. Yet habits developed over decades did not disappear overnight. Many people continued following familiar routines even after newer technology became available. Bedrooms remained places where tradition lingered. Families often inherited furniture from parents and grandparents, and a room might contain objects spanning several generations. A beautifully carved bed could have been made decades earlier, while the reading lamp beside it represented the newest engineering. A grandmother sleeping beneath a handmade quilt might use a modern electric bedside light before closing her book for the evening. The room itself became a small museum of changing history, where old craftsmanship and new invention quietly shared the same space. The windows of these great houses also reveal much about nighttime life. During daylight, they framed beautiful views of gardens, fountains, lawns, carriage drives, forests, or city streets. At night, they became mirrors. Once the room was illuminated and darkness settled outside, the glass reflected the interior almost perfectly. Someone looking toward the window often saw the bedroom itself, rather than the landscape beyond. The fire glowed in the reflection. The bed appeared beside the curtains. Lamps multiplied inside the glass. This simple effect could create a strangely peaceful atmosphere, almost as though the room extended into another silent world beyond the window. If the moon happened to be full, however, everything changed. Moonlight entering through large windows often illuminated entire bedrooms without any need for artificial light. Silver beams stretched across polished wooden floors, climbed furniture, and rested quietly on white bed linens. Expensive mirrors reflected the pale light into unexpected corners, making familiar rooms appear entirely different. A person waking briefly during the night might remain still for several minutes, simply watching the moonlight slowly shift across the ceiling as the hours passed. Unlike electric lighting, moonlight constantly changed. Clouds drifted, branches moved gently in the breeze, creating slow shadows that crossed walls, almost like silent waves. Many people of the period commented on the beauty of moonlit gardens, and one can easily imagine a restless sleeper walking to the window for a few quiet moments before returning to bed. Large estates often employed gardeners whose work extended far beyond flowers. Decorative trees were carefully positioned to create beautiful views from important rooms. Curving pathways guided visitors through landscaped grounds during the day, But at night, these same paths disappeared beneath darkness. Fountains continued flowing even when nobody watched them. Statues stood silently beneath trees. Marble benches became pale shapes beneath the moon. Somewhere beyond the formal gardens, woods surrounded portions of many country estates. Owls called occasionally from the trees, while distant streams continued flowing exactly as they had long before the mansion itself existed. Wealth had transformed the landscape into something carefully designed, yet nature continued following its own timeless rhythm. Inside the house, time itself moved at a noticeably slower pace than it often does today. There was no expectation of answering messages before going to sleep. Newspapers stopped arriving once evening ended. Businesses closed their doors. Stock exchanges rested until morning. A factory owner could certainly worry about tomorrow's work. But there was little practical reason to remain awake checking updates because no updates existed. The night created a natural pause in daily life. Business resumed after sunrise. Until then, the world waited. This slower rhythm influenced sleep in subtle ways. Many people did not rush immediately into bed after finishing dinner. Instead, evenings often unfolded gradually. Families gathered in libraries for conversation. Music might be played in the drawing room. Someone read aloud while others embroidered, wrote letters, or quietly talked beside the fire. Older relatives remembered earlier decades. Children listened until bedtime arrived. Eventually, one by one, family members wished each other good night before disappearing upstairs. The mansion slowly emptied of conversation rather than falling silent all at once, for those fortunate enough to own country estates. Nighttime walks were sometimes among the day's greatest pleasures. During warm evenings, after dinner had ended, and the hottest part of the day had passed, families occasionally strolled through gardens illuminated by moonlight or lanterns. Gravel paths crunched softly beneath polished shoes. Roses released stronger fragrances after sunset. Fountains reflected the moon. Cool evening air replaced the warmth of the afternoon. Such walks required no particular destination. They were simply opportunities to enjoy the quiet beauty of the estate before retiring for the night. Returning indoors afterward brought another pleasant sensation. The mansion felt calm and welcoming after the cool night air. Servants had already prepared the bedrooms. Fires burned gently if the weather required them. Curtains were drawn. Lamps glowed softly. Fresh water waited beside the washstand. Slippers rested neatly near the bed. These small preparations communicated care without requiring words. Much of luxury consisted not of extravagance, but of thoughtful attention to comfort. The wardrobe itself reflected nighttime customs. Wealthy households often maintained separate clothing specifically for sleeping. Nightshirts and nightgowns were designed to provide warmth while allowing greater freedom of movement than tightly fitted daytime fashions. Fabrics varied according to season. Lightweight cotton might be chosen for summer, while flannel or heavier materials became popular during colder months. Some people also wore sleeping caps to help retain warmth in chilly bedrooms. Looking at surviving examples today, these garments appear remarkably simple compared with the elaborate clothing worn during the day. The contrast reminds us that bedtime allowed people to escape the restrictions of fashion, if only until morning. The bedroom furniture supported many small evening rituals. Dressing tables held brushes, combs, perfumes, mirrors, hairpins and grooming tools arranged with remarkable precision. Jewelry boxes protected valuable necklaces, rings, brooches, and watches overnight. Small drawers stored letters, photographs, spectacles, gloves, and personal keepsakes. Every object had its place. Servants often knew these arrangements by memory, returning each item exactly where its owner expected to find it. Such organization became essential in households containing hundreds or even thousands of possessions. Personal photographs became increasingly common during the late 19th century as photography grew more accessible. Unlike formal painted portraits displayed downstairs, these smaller photographs often appeared in private bedrooms. Family members who had died, children away at school, relatives travelling abroad, or dear friends might all occupy small frames beside the bed. Before sleeping, a person could glance toward these familiar faces, bringing thoughts of loved ones into the final quiet moments of the day. Long-distance communication remained slow, making these photographs especially meaningful. They represented people who might not be seen again for months or even years. Another feature that shaped sleep was the remarkable thickness of many bedroom curtains. These heavy draperies served several practical purposes beyond decoration. They helped reduce drafts during winter, blocked early morning sunlight, provided privacy from neighbouring houses or passing carriages, and softened echoes within large rooms. Closing them each evening transformed the bedroom into a quieter, more enclosed space. When morning arrived and servants opened the curtains, daylight entered dramatically, almost like the raising of a theatre curtain beginning another performance. The scent inside a bedroom also changed throughout the seasons. Fresh flowers arranged in vases added fragrance during spring and summer. Lavender sachets were often placed among linens to keep them smelling pleasant. Polished wood carried its own warm aroma, especially near fireplaces. Wax from candles, beeswax furniture, polish, clean linen, soap, perfume, and faint traces of coal smoke combined into a scent unique to large 19th century homes. Every mansion likely possessed its own distinctive smell, immediately recognizable to those who lived there. Despite every luxury, sleep remained deeply personal. One family member might drift asleep within minutes, while another struggled with insomnia. Some preferred complete silence. Others found comfort listening to the crackling fireplace until the final embers faded. One person enjoyed sleeping with windows slightly open, even in cool weather, believing fresh air promoted health. There was also the matter of the weather outside the bedroom walls, something that no amount of wealth could ever completely control. A Gilded Age mansion might be built from the finest stone, filled with imported marble and lined with expensive wood panelling, but it still stood beneath the same sky as every farmhouse, boarding house, and city apartment. During calm evenings, the ground surrounding the mansion could seem almost magical. Moonlight settled gently over perfectly trimmed lawns, reflecting faintly from ornamental ponds and fountains. Statues cast long shadows across gravel paths, and rows of carefully planted trees stood silently as though guarding the estate until morning. From an upstairs bedroom, these gardens looked peaceful enough to resemble paintings. Yet nature could change its mood without warning. A strong wind sweeping across the property rattled windows that had seemed perfectly still only moments before. Rain arrived in steady sheets, tapping against glass with rhythms that varied throughout the night. Sometimes storms appeared so suddenly that servants hurried from room to room closing windows before furniture or carpets became damp. Lightning briefly illuminated every tree, chimney, and rooftop, revealing the entire estate in brilliant white before darkness returned. For a few seconds, even the largest mansion felt surprisingly small beneath the power of the sky. Many wealthy families genuinely enjoyed watching storms from the safety of their homes, sitting beside a bedroom fireplace, while rain lashed the windows created a comforting contrast between warmth and cold, light and darkness. The crackling fire offered reassurance, reminding everyone inside that although the weather could be dramatic, the house itself remained secure. At least most of the time, severe storms occasionally damaged roofs, broke windows, or uprooted trees across the estate. Repairs became yet another responsibility managed by the household after the weather passed. Fog created a completely different atmosphere. Coastal mansions, particularly those overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, sometimes woke beneath thick blankets of mist that concealed everything beyond a short distance. From a bedroom window, even nearby gardens could disappear into soft grey emptiness. The world seemed smaller, quieter, almost dreamlike. Sound behaved differently in fog as well. A distant carriage might be heard before it could be seen. The bell of a nearby church drifted gently across the mist. Somewhere out at sea, the mournful call of a foghorn occasionally reached the estate, reminding everyone that ships were navigating dangerous waters beyond the invisible horizon. Snowfall transformed the mansion into another world entirely. During heavy winter storms, the estate became isolated beneath thick white blankets stretching across lawns, terraces, rooftops, and gardens. Paths disappeared until servants or gardeners cleared them. Trees bent beneath the weight of fresh snow, while chimneys sent steady streams of smoke into pale winter skies. Looking out from a warm bedroom, the landscape seemed peaceful beyond description. Every familiar feature had been softened. Gravel drives vanished beneath white drifts. Fountains froze. Flower beds rested beneath snow until spring returned months later. Inside, winter evenings encouraged a slower pace of life. Families often gathered around fireplaces after dinner, rather than wandering through gardens. Reading, conversation, music, embroidery, and card games filled the hours before bedtime. Grand pianos found in many drawing rooms were used frequently during these evenings. Someone might perform a favourite composition while relatives quietly listened. Music carried softly through open doorways and echoed faintly along wide corridors. Long after the final note faded, listeners carried those melodies upstairs with them, where silence gradually replaced conversation. Some members of wealthy society developed surprisingly regular bedtime habits, despite their luxurious surroundings. Not every evening involved grand parties or formal dinners. Many families valued routine, especially when children were present or when business required early mornings. The household gradually settled into familiar patterns. Lamps were lowered at similar hours. Servants completed the same preparations each night. Bedroom fires were checked in exactly the same order. Curtains were drawn, doors were locked. Even the household clocks, scattered throughout the mansion, reinforced these routines by quietly marking each passing hour. Children especially benefited from predictable schedules. Nurses and governesses often insisted upon fixed bedtimes, regardless of whether adults remained entertaining downstairs. Imagine lying awake as a child in the nursery, while faint music drifted upward from a ballroom where your parents entertained important guests. Laughter echoed softly through distant hallways, mixed with the sounds of conversation and dancing. Eventually those sounds faded as visitors departed, leaving only silence. The child experienced the grandeur of the mansion differently, hearing much of its social life without participating in it. For older family members, nighttime often provided opportunities for quiet reflection. Many had lived through enormous changes during the 19th century. Someone born in the 1820s or 1830s had witnessed the arrival of railroads, photography, telegraphs, telephones, electric lighting, skyscrapers, and countless other inventions unimaginable during childhood. Sitting quietly beside a bedroom fire before sleep, such a person might naturally compare the present with memories from decades earlier. Their grandchildren accepted electric lights as exciting new conveniences, while grandparents remembered when every evening depended entirely upon candles. Travel also influenced sleeping habits among the wealthy. Families frequently journeyed between city residences, country estates, mountain retreats, seaside resorts, and occasionally Europe. Each destination offered different bedrooms, different climates, different sounds, and different routines. A bedroom overlooking Fifth Avenue in New York presented an entirely different nighttime experience from one overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in Newport or the forests of the Hudson Valley. Yet servants often traveled with the family, recreating familiar comforts wherever possible. Favorite pillows, personal belongings, books, photographs, dressing cases, writing materials, and treasured objects accompanied lengthy journeys. So unfamiliar bedrooms could feel more like home packing, for such travel required astonishing organization. Large trunks filled with carefully folded clothing, shoes, hats, gloves, linens, toiletries, books, and accessories accompanied wealthy families almost everywhere. Servants unpacked these belongings upon arrival, arranging bedrooms so completely that within hours the unfamiliar room reflected the habits of its temporary occupants. Photographs appeared on dressing tables, books rested beside beds, clothing hung neatly inside wardrobes. Small personal touches transformed elegant guest rooms into lived-in spaces. Nighttime conversation between married couples could also reveal much about life during the Gilded Age. After the formal obligations of entertaining ended and servants withdrew, husbands and wives finally found moments away from public attention. They discussed family matters, business concerns, children's education, travel plans, charitable work, or upcoming social engagements. Sometimes these conversations lasted only a few minutes before sleep. Other evenings they stretched much longer, especially if important decisions needed to be made. Bedrooms offered privacy unavailable elsewhere in the house. For those who occupied separate bedrooms, visits before retiring remained common. Separate sleeping arrangements often reflected practical considerations rather than emotional distance. Different schedules, different sleeping habits, health concerns, snoring, personal preference, or simply the availability of abundant space all contributed to the practice among the wealthy. Separate bedrooms represented another luxury unavailable to most ordinary families living in much smaller homes. The mansion itself seemed almost alive during these quiet hours. Wooden beams expanded and contracted with changing temperatures. Stone walls slowly released heat absorbed during the day. Metal fixtures cooled, Large windows responded subtly to outside weather. None of these movements suggested danger. They were simply reminders that enormous buildings constantly adjusted to the environment surrounding them. Residents who spent years living in the house gradually recognized these familiar sounds. A particular creak near midnight might always come from the library floor. Another sound belonged to the staircase. The pipes beneath one bedroom always clicked briefly after hot water had been used elsewhere. Over time, the mansion developed a nightly language understood by those who lived within it. Visitors unfamiliar with these sounds sometimes imagined far more mysterious explanations. Diaries from the 19th century occasionally describe guests startled by unexpected noises inside unfamiliar country houses. What seemed alarming during the first night often became completely ordinary by the third or fourth. Human beings quickly adapt even to enormous surroundings. The grand staircase no longer feels intimidating after climbing it every day. The bedroom ceiling no longer seems impossibly high. The long corridor becomes simply the route to breakfast each morning. Pets occasionally added their own character to nighttime life. Cats wandered quietly through service areas searching for mice that threatened food stores. Dogs slept near fireplaces, beside beds, or in designated parts of the house, depending upon family preference. One of the most overlooked parts of sleeping in a Gilded Age mansion was the simple act of waking up during the middle of the night. Today, many people instinctively reach for a smartphone to check the time, glance at notifications, or briefly scroll through messages before trying to fall asleep again. None of those distractions existed in the late 19th century. If someone woke at 2 or 3 in the morning, the room remained exactly as it had been when they first closed their eyes. The fire had grown smaller. The lamp had long since been extinguished. Moonlight or darkness filled the room depending on the weather. The only indication of time might come from a distant clock striking the hour somewhere else in the mansion. Imagine opening your eyes to complete silence. For several moments you remain perfectly still beneath thick blankets, listening carefully. Somewhere below, a grandfather clock begins striking 3 slow notes. The sound echoes faintly upward through the stairwell, before fading into silence once more. There is no electric glow from alarm clocks, no distant traffic, and no constant background hum of modern appliances. Instead, the quiet is so complete that you can hear the gentle movement of the fire settling inside the grate. A single ember collapses with a tiny crackle before glowing softly again. You pull the blankets a little closer and continue listening. After a few minutes, even your own breathing seems unusually loud. Many people of the period believed that the hours before dawn possessed a unique stillness, unlike any other part of the day. Servants had finished almost all of their evening duties, yet the morning staff had not fully begun their work. Visitors remained asleep. Children were quiet. Horses rested in their stables. Even household pets often curled peacefully beside fireplaces or bedroom doors. The mansion seemed suspended in time, existing between yesterday and tomorrow. Occasionally, someone might hear footsteps somewhere along a distant corridor. At first, the sound could seem mysterious, but there were usually ordinary explanations. Perhaps a night maid was checking that a bedroom fire remained safe. Perhaps a nurse was visiting a child who had awakened. Perhaps a butler was ensuring exterior doors remained securely locked after a late social gathering. Large households never became completely inactive. Even while most people slept, a small number of individuals quietly continued caring for the enormous property. During particularly grand house parties, the schedule became even more interesting. Wealthy hosts often welcomed relatives and friends for several days rather than a single evening. Guest bedrooms throughout the mansion were occupied simultaneously, creating a temporary community beneath one roof. Every bedroom reflected the personality of its occupant. Some guests rose before sunrise for horseback riding or morning walks. Others preferred sleeping well into the morning after long evenings of conversation and entertainment. Servants learned these habits quickly, adjusting breakfast trays and morning routines accordingly. Imagine walking quietly through one of these corridors shortly after dawn. One bedroom door remains firmly closed because its occupant rarely rises before 9. Another already shows signs of activity as sunlight slips beneath the doorway. Somewhere nearby, a servant carries a tray containing tea, toast, and fresh fruit for an early riser who prefers breakfast in bed. Downstairs, cooks are already preparing larger meals, while butlers organize newspapers and correspondence arriving from the outside world. The mansion itself almost seemed to breathe according to these daily rhythms. During daylight, it expanded socially, welcoming visitors and filling every major room with movement. At night, it contracted inward, becoming a private refuge where only family members, overnight guests, and essential servants remained awake. This constant expansion and contraction gave the house its own quiet personality. Bedrooms often overlooked different parts of the estate, and those views shaped the experience of waking each morning. A room facing the eastern gardens received the first sunlight of the day. Golden light gradually filtered through curtains, illuminating carved furniture and patterned wallpaper before reaching the bed itself. A bedroom overlooking the western side remained darker for longer, encouraging its occupant to sleep later if household duties allowed. Some rooms looked across formal gardens where gardeners soon appeared trimming hedges or watering flower beds. Others overlooked carriage drives where stable hands prepared horses for another busy day. Morning light revealed details hidden during the night. The polished wood of wardrobes glowed warmly. Crystal handles sparkled. Decorative wallpaper displayed colours impossible to appreciate beneath candlelight. The marble fireplace reflected sunlight differently. With every passing hour, dust particles floated gently through bright beams of light, before disappearing once more into shadow. A room that had felt mysterious during darkness suddenly appeared cheerful and welcoming. Servants often entered bedrooms only after receiving permission or determining that the occupant had awakened. Privacy remained extremely important among wealthy families. A maid quietly knocked before entering, carrying fresh towels, warm water, or breakfast if requested. Windows might be opened briefly to refresh the air unless the weather discouraged it. Bedding was straightened, clothing prepared, and yesterday's ashes removed from the fireplace before a new fire was laid if necessary. These morning routines happened with remarkable efficiency because servants repeated them every day. Experienced housemaids could restore an entire bedroom in surprisingly little time. Sheets were smoothed until almost perfectly wrinkle. Free pillows were fluffed and carefully arranged. Rugs were straightened, curtains adjusted, waste containers emptied. Personal belongings remained exactly where their owners expected to find them. Such consistency allowed wealthy residents to move comfortably through daily life, without considering how much effort supported that comfort. For many members of high society, Mornings also became the quietest part of the day. Social obligations usually intensified during afternoons and evenings. Calls upon friends, charity meetings, shopping, business appointments, dinners, concerts, and receptions gradually filled the schedule. Early morning, therefore, offered rare moments of peace. Some individuals spent this time reading newspapers beside bedroom windows. Others wrote letters before breakfast, or simply enjoyed looking across gardens while drinking tea or coffee. These peaceful habits reflected a slower pace of life than many modern professionals experience today. Seasonal sunlight dramatically influenced sleeping patterns as well. During long summer mornings, dawn arrived surprisingly early. Birds often began singing while much of the household still slept. Light entered bedrooms hours before breakfast, encouraging naturally earlier waking unless heavy curtains remained closed. Winter produced the opposite effect. Dark mornings encouraged people to remain beneath warm blankets a little longer, especially when cold air greeted anyone leaving the comfort of the bed. One particularly charming custom involved fresh flowers placed throughout the mansion. Gardeners supplied blooms almost daily during growing seasons, and bedrooms frequently contained small arrangements selected for their fragrance and appearance. Roses, lilies, violets, lilacs, peonies, or seasonal blossoms brightened dressing tables and windowsills. Waking to the scent of fresh flowers added another quiet pleasure to everyday life. The flowers also connected indoor luxury with the carefully maintained gardens beyond the windows. The relationship between indoors and outdoors remained much stronger than it is today. Without sealed climate-controlled buildings, bedrooms constantly responded to changing weather. A cool breeze entered through slightly open windows. Rain could be smelled before it arrived. Freshly cut grass drifted indoors after gardeners worked nearby. During autumn, crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Winter brought the faint smell of wood smoke from neighbouring chimneys. Every season announced itself naturally without requiring anyone to check a calendar. Time passed differently inside these great houses. There was less pressure to hurry through every morning. Breakfast might last an hour while family members discussed current events or travel plans. Reading newspapers became an unhurried activity rather than a quick glance at headlines. Letters received thoughtful replies written carefully by hand. Even preparing for the day required patience, because formal clothing involved many layers and details. This slower rhythm extended into bedtime as well. Nobody expected instant entertainment available at the touch of a button. Instead, evenings gradually wound down. Conversation became quieter. Lamps were extinguished one by one. Hallways slowly emptied. Bedrooms filled with gentle firelight before finally becoming dark. Sleep arrived naturally as the household itself settled into silence. Modern visitors sometimes imagine that living in such a mansion must have felt endlessly glamorous. Certainly there were spectacular dinners, elegant parties, beautiful clothing, and magnificent surroundings. Yet the greatest luxury may have been something much quieter, having enough time to enjoy peaceful evenings without constant interruption. Sitting beside a fireplace, reading a favourite novel, writing a thoughtful letter to a distant friend, watching snow fall beyond the bedroom window, or listening to gentle rain while comfortably tucked beneath warm blankets. These ordinary pleasures required no audience. There was also a quiet ritual that unfolded long before anyone actually climbed into bed, one that many visitors to a Gilded Age mansion would never have noticed. As evening drew to a close, servants moved through the upper floors with practiced efficiency, preparing each bedroom for the night. Curtains that had remained open throughout the day were drawn carefully across the tall windows. Lamps were adjusted to provide a gentle, comfortable light rather than the bright illumination used during dressing or reading. The fire in the fireplace was checked one final time, with fresh coal or wood added if necessary to ensure warmth lasted well into the night. Water pitchers were filled, wash basins arranged neatly, and clean towels folded with remarkable precision. Slippers were placed exactly where they would be needed in the morning. Every object seemed to anticipate the needs of the person who would soon enter the room. These preparations were completed quietly, often while the family remained downstairs finishing dessert or enjoying conversation. The bedrooms waited in perfect order, almost as though they had prepared themselves. This invisible work was one of the defining characteristics of life in an affluent household. Comfort appeared effortless, because someone else had spent hours making certain it would seem that way. The bed itself often became the centerpiece of the room, not only because of its size, but because of the craftsmanship involved in creating it. Many were built from richly carved oak, walnut, or mahogany, with decorative headboards rising high above the mattress. Some featured intricate floral carvings, while others displayed classical designs inspired by European architecture. Heavy bedposts supported elegant canopies or decorative fabrics that added warmth as well as beauty. Although canopy beds had once served practical purposes by helping retain heat and reducing drafts, by the Gilded Age they also represented tradition and status. Looking at one today, it is easy to admire its beauty. Sleeping beneath it, however, would have felt surprisingly cozy, especially on cold winter evenings, when thick curtains surrounded the bed and the fireplace glowed nearby. Blankets themselves were often layered carefully according to the season. Fine linen sheets rested closest to the body, followed by wool blankets that provided warmth without excessive weight. Decorative quilts or embroidered coverlets completed the arrangement. During colder months, additional blankets could be added, while lighter bedding appeared during summer. A servant preparing the room knew exactly how each member of the family preferred their bed arranged. One person liked extra blankets folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Another preferred only a single cover, unless temperatures dropped dramatically. Such details were remembered without needing daily instruction. The bedroom fireplace contributed more than warmth. It created an atmosphere unlike any produced by modern heating systems. Flames flickered gently across polished furniture, causing shadows to dance softly on walls covered with patterned wallpaper or silk fabric. Occasionally, a log shifted, sending a brief shower of glowing sparks upward behind the protective screen before settling once more. The warmth spread unevenly through the room, leaving areas near the fire pleasantly comfortable while distant corners remained noticeably cooler. This difference encouraged people to gather naturally around the fireplace before finally slipping beneath warm blankets. Some evenings, especially during winter, family members lingered in bedrooms longer than expected, simply because the room felt peaceful. A husband might finish reading correspondence while seated in an upholstered chair beside the fire. His wife might continue working on embroidery or reading a novel nearby. Conversation became quieter than it had been downstairs. Without guests to entertain, there was no need for formal manners or carefully chosen topics. These private conversations often formed the most genuine moments of the day. Children experienced bedtime differently. Nurses frequently encouraged calming routines intended to help them sleep soundly. Stories were read aloud, prayers recited, and candles extinguished only after children settled comfortably beneath their blankets. A nervous child might ask one more question before finally closing their eyes. Another requested that the nursery door remain slightly open, so a faint glow from the hallway provided reassurance during the night. Such small comforts remain remarkably familiar even today, reminding us that despite all the grandeur surrounding these families, childhood itself changed very little. Elderly relatives often appreciated bedrooms located where morning sunlight arrived gently through east-facing windows. Sitting beside those windows after waking became a cherished routine for many. Wrapped in warm dressing gowns, they watched gardeners beginning another day's work, observed changing seasons across the estate, or simply enjoyed the quiet beauty of the landscape before breakfast. Retirement from active business or social life often allowed these peaceful mornings to become treasured moments of reflection. Bookshelves inside bedrooms gradually filled with favourite volumes collected over many years. Some books contained handwritten notes tucked between pages. Others bore inscriptions from friends or family members marking birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, or Christmas celebrations. Reading the same beloved novel beside the same bedroom fireplace winter after winter created comforting traditions that lasted decades. The room itself accumulated memories alongside its occupants. Family photographs increasingly occupied important places on bedside tables during the late 19th century. Improvements in photography allowed ordinary moments as well as formal portraits to be preserved. A parent travelling abroad might leave behind a photograph for children to keep nearby. Newly married couples often displayed wedding portraits in their private rooms. Grandparents smiled gently from carefully framed photographs placed where they could be seen each morning upon waking. These images quietly accompanied everyday life without drawing attention to themselves. Another interesting feature of Gilded Age bedrooms was the surprising absence of clutter despite containing many possessions. Wealthy households owned large wardrobes and dressing rooms capable of storing clothing neatly out of sight. Trunks held seasonal garments no longer needed. Cabinets concealed personal belongings. Because servants continually organized these spaces, surfaces often appeared remarkably tidy. A visitor entering the room might assume very little happened there. Yet behind wardrobe doors lay carefully arranged collections of clothing, shoes, hats, gloves, jewelry, travel accessories, and countless everyday necessities. As midnight approached, outdoor sounds became even rarer. A distant owl might call from wooded areas beyond the gardens. Occasionally the faint whistle of a late-night train drifted across the countryside, reminding listeners that the modern world continued moving even while the estate slept. In cities, the soundscape differed slightly. Horse-drawn carriages occasionally passed beneath bedroom windows, their wheels echoing along paved streets before fading into the distance. Policemen walked their nighttime patrols, their footsteps sometimes accompanied by the soft tapping of walking sticks against the pavement. Somewhere far away, church bells quietly marked another passing hour. These gentle sounds rarely disturbed sleep for long, because they arrived naturally rather than continuously. Modern cities often surround residents with endless mechanical noise, but 19th century nights alternated between brief moments of activity and long stretches of remarkable silence. Human ears adjusted accordingly. A single passing carriage could seem significant simply because nothing followed it for several minutes afterward. The changing phases of the moon also influenced nighttime inside the mansion more than many modern people might expect. During a full moon, bedrooms often remained bright enough for familiar objects to be recognized without artificial light. Curtains glowing softly with silver light created peaceful patterns across the floor. During a new moon, however, darkness became almost complete once lamps were extinguished. Walking across an unfamiliar bedroom required genuine caution. Furniture disappeared into blackness, making even simple tasks surprisingly difficult without relighting a candle. Clouds crossing the moon created constantly changing patterns of light. A bedroom might brighten for several minutes before gradually returning to darkness as clouds drifted overhead. Someone unable to sleep could watch these slow changes from bed, noticing how every object in the room transformed with each passing moment. The carved headboard appeared almost alive beneath shifting shadows. Curtains moved gently in the breeze, reflections inside mirrors faded and returned. The room seemed to breathe quietly alongside its sleeping occupant. Many wealthy homeowners developed a deep appreciation for these peaceful nighttime moments, precisely because their days were so busy. Business meetings, social obligations, charitable work, correspondence, travel, family responsibilities, and household management filled daylight hours with constant activity. Night offered something increasingly rare, uninterrupted solitude. The bedroom became a sanctuary where expectations temporarily disappeared. Nobody requested decisions. Nobody required formal conversation. Nobody expected elegant clothing or polished manners. For a few precious hours each evening, the individual behind the public reputation simply rested. The mansion itself reflected this transition beautifully. Another fascinating aspect of spending the night in a Gilded Age mansion was how deeply the household depended upon routine. These homes were enormous, often containing dozens of bedrooms spread across multiple floors. Yet they operated with remarkable precision. Everyone from the owners to the newest servant generally understood where they were expected to be and what they were expected to do. This predictable rhythm helped such large households function smoothly. By the time darkness settled outside, nearly every member of the staff knew exactly which fireplaces still needed attention, which bedrooms required fresh water, which guests preferred extra blankets, and which family members enjoyed reading before going to sleep. It was a quiet choreography repeated night after night, year after year. Imagine wandering through one of these mansions just before bedtime. The public rooms are beginning to empty. A butler quietly extinguishes unnecessary lamps in the drawing room. Somewhere down a long hallway, a maid carries folded linen toward the guest bedrooms. In the library, the last member of the family closes a book before placing it carefully back onto a polished wooden shelf. Upstairs, another servant gently opens a bedroom door, checks that the curtains are fully closed, adjusts the position of a chair near the fireplace, and silently leaves again. None of these actions seem particularly remarkable on their own, but together they create an atmosphere of calm order that defines the household. Lone detail that often surprised visitors was how much attention wealthy families devoted to fresh air. Throughout much of the 19th century, doctors and household guides strongly recommended proper ventilation. Even during colder months, Many people believed that stale air contributed to poor health. As a result, bedroom windows were often opened for a short period each morning, while beds were aired and rooms were cleaned. Feather mattresses and blankets might be folded back to allow moisture to escape before everything was neatly remade. This daily practice reflected contemporary ideas about cleanliness and comfort, long before modern climate control became available. The bedroom wardrobes themselves were miniature worlds of organization. Formal evening wear hung beside carefully pressed daytime clothing. Shelves contained neatly folded nightwear, dressing gowns, slippers, gloves, scarves, and seasonal garments. Hat boxes rested on upper shelves, while polished shoes waited below. Personal items such as watches, cufflinks, brooches, spectacles, and handkerchiefs occupied carefully labelled drawers. For many wealthy individuals, maintaining such order required constant assistance from valets or ladies' maids who understood exactly where everything belonged. A misplaced item could easily disappear within the sheer size of the house, making organization essential. Even the smallest objects reflected craftsmanship. Hairbrushes often featured carved wooden handles or polished silver backs. Wash basins were made from fine porcelain decorated with delicate patterns. Water pitchers matched the basins perfectly. Candlesticks, if still used, displayed intricate metalwork or crystal details that sparkled beautifully in the evening light. Bedside clocks were frequently enclosed within elegant brass or marble cases, quietly marking the hours with dependable precision. Every object combined usefulness with beauty, reflecting the belief that even ordinary daily routines deserved attractive surroundings. Nighttime also revealed how much the mansion relied upon invisible systems hidden from guests. Beneath polished floors ran pipes carrying water throughout the house. Behind walls were flues directing smoke safely upward from fireplaces. Coal or firewood had been delivered earlier in the day and carefully stored. Kitchens below contained ovens, boilers, storage rooms, and workspaces that most visitors never entered. Cellars held supplies needed to sustain the household through changing seasons. Sleeping peacefully upstairs depended upon countless practical arrangements operating quietly below. For those staying as guests, bedtime could involve one final visit from a servant asking whether anything more was required before retiring for the night. Perhaps another blanket would be welcome, because temperatures had fallen unexpectedly. Maybe additional candles were requested for reading. Some guests preferred a glass of water beside the bed, while others appreciated warm milk or tea before sleeping. Such small acts of hospitality reinforced the reputation of wealthy hosts who took pride in making visitors feel entirely comfortable. Not every bedroom in the mansion reflected the latest fashions. Families often preserved certain rooms almost unchanged for sentimental reasons. A grandmother might continue sleeping in the same bedroom she had occupied for decades, despite newer decorative styles becoming popular elsewhere in the house. Furniture inherited from earlier generations remained because it carried family history, rather than because it matched current taste. These rooms quietly connected different generations beneath one roof. A young grandchild entering such a bedroom might hear stories associated with every chair, painting, or writing desk, transforming ordinary furniture into treasured family heirlooms. Books left beside the bed often revealed private interests, hidden behind public appearances. A powerful businessman might spend evenings reading poetry rather than financial reports. A fashionable society hostess could quietly enjoy scientific journals or travel narratives, historical biographies, novels by popular authors, collections of sermons, gardening guides, atlases, and foreign language books all found places within private bedrooms. Reading before sleep allowed people to pursue personal curiosity away from the expectations of society. Sometimes illness temporarily changed the entire atmosphere of the house. If one member of the family became seriously unwell, servants moved more quietly than usual. Doctors arrived at unusual hours. Relatives spoke in hushed voices along hallways. Meals were prepared differently according to medical advice. Bedroom doors remained partially open so nurses could hear if assistance was needed. The mansion that normally echoed with confident activity suddenly revolved around a single room where everyone hoped for recovery. Such moments reminded even the wealthiest families that health remained one of life's greatest uncertainties. The opposite also occurred during times of celebration. When a wedding, birthday, or holiday approached, bedrooms filled with anticipation. New clothing arrived from dressmakers and tailors. Gift boxes appeared on dressing tables. Fresh flowers decorated rooms more generously than usual. Family members might remain awake slightly later than normal, discussing preparations for the following day's festivities, before finally saying goodnight. Even then, the familiar routines of preparing the bedrooms continued, ensuring that excitement never entirely replaced comfort. As the years passed, children gradually inherited bedrooms, once occupied by older relatives, creating an ongoing sense of continuity within the house. A room that had belonged to a young aunt might later become a niece's bedroom. Furniture passed quietly from one generation to another. Curtains were replaced, wallpaper updated, and decorative styles changed. Yet the room itself remained part of the family's continuing story. Looking back through family photographs decades later, several generations might recognize the very same fireplace, window, or carved bed appearing behind different faces over the years. Another subtle feature of nighttime was the changing smell of the house itself. During autumn, fireplaces introduced the comforting scent of burning wood or coal. At Christmas, evergreen branches and festive decorations added fresh aromas to hallways and bedrooms. Spring filled open windows with the fragrance of blossoms from carefully maintained gardens. Summer evenings carried the scent of warm grass after gardeners completed their work. Unlike modern climate-controlled buildings, the mansion constantly exchanged air with the surrounding landscape, allowing each season to leave its own gentle signature inside the house. The walls themselves held memories impossible to see. Every bedroom had witnessed ordinary conversations, private laughter, family disagreements, bedtime stories, quiet tears, letters written by lamplight, and peaceful mornings watching the sunrise. These moments rarely appeared in official histories, yet they formed the true life of the mansion. The grand staircase impressed visitors, but the bedroom preserved the family's most personal experiences. By the final years of the Gilded Age, many families began noticing that the world outside their gates was changing rapidly. Automobiles slowly appeared alongside horse-drawn carriages. Telephones connected houses more efficiently than ever before. Electric lighting spread from the wealthiest neighborhoods into more ordinary homes. Cities expanded. Factories multiplied. Daily life became steadily faster. Yet inside many bedrooms, Bedtime remained reassuringly familiar. Curtains were still drawn by hand. Favourite books still rested beside the bed. Prayers were still whispered before sleep. Morning sunlight still entered quietly through tall windows. The bedroom became one of the last places where older rhythms survived, despite dramatic changes beyond the estate. Perhaps this explains why so many preserved gilded age mansions continue to feel unexpectedly peaceful today. Although the voices have vanished and the fireplaces no longer burn each evening, the rooms still seem to hold the gentle rhythm of ordinary nights long ago. Standing beside one of those carefully made beds, it is easy to imagine the final moments before sleep. If you remained awake just a little longer, perhaps unable to drift back to sleep, you might begin to notice details that people living in the mansion had long stopped noticing. The wallpaper, which looked richly coloured during the day, became little more than soft patterns in the darkness. The carved edges of the wardrobe cast delicate shadows across the floor. The polished brass handle on the bedroom door reflected the faint glow of dying embers from the fireplace. Everything in the room seemed quieter, slower, and somehow more patient than it had appeared only a few hours earlier. There was no urgency during these hours. No appointments demanded immediate attention. No servants knocked at the door. No visitors expected conversation. For perhaps the only time during the entire day, the mansion belonged completely to silence. Even the clocks, despite faithfully measuring every passing second, seemed less interested in rushing anyone toward tomorrow. Many wealthy families considered a good night's sleep to be an important part of maintaining health. Physicians of the late 19th century often emphasized regular habits, fresh air, moderate exercise, and proper rest. Household manuals advised against overly heated bedrooms and encouraged clean bedding, orderly surroundings, and calm evening routines. Although medical understanding differed greatly from modern knowledge, there was already a growing appreciation that restful sleep contributed to both physical and mental well-being. Of course, not everyone followed this advice perfectly. Business leaders sometimes carried the worries of enormous financial decisions into bed with them. The owners of railroads, banks, steel companies, shipping firms, and factories might spend evenings calculating investments or thinking about contracts worth fortunes. Newspapers frequently reported sudden market changes, strikes, industrial accidents, and political developments capable of affecting entire industries. Even after extinguishing the lamp, such concerns could remain active in the mind. Wealth often reduced physical hardship, but introduced responsibilities on an entirely different scale. A society hostess faced different pressures: planning dinners, arranging guest lists, organizing charity events, supervising household staff, selecting fashionable clothing, maintaining social relationships, and ensuring that every gathering met the expectations of high society, demanded remarkable attention to detail. A successful evening depended upon countless small decisions made long before guests arrived. Once the celebrations ended and the bedroom door finally closed, those responsibilities temporarily disappeared. Yet tomorrow's engagements were already waiting. Invitations required replies. Calling cards needed attention. Travel arrangements had to be confirmed. Social calendars remained surprisingly full. Young adults experienced nighttime differently still. A son preparing to enter the family business might spend quiet evenings reading economic reports or studying correspondence from his father. A daughter approaching marriage could find herself thinking about future responsibilities, new households, or unfamiliar expectations awaiting her. Large bedrooms provided privacy for these thoughts, allowing personal reflection far removed from the formal atmosphere downstairs. For elderly family members, nighttime often became a time for memory. Sitting quietly beside a bedroom window before retiring, they might look across gardens they had watched mature over decades. Trees planted during childhood had grown tall enough to shade entire sections of the estate. Children once heard laughing in the nursery had become adults with families of their own. Servants who had arrived as young men and women were now senior members of the household. Even the mansion itself had aged alongside its occupants. Carpets had been replaced, wallpaper renewed, furniture restored. Yet beneath these changes, the familiar structure remained constant. It is easy to imagine one of these older residents pausing beside the window on a clear autumn night. The moon hangs low above the estate. The gravel carriage drive appears pale beneath its light. Somewhere beyond the gardens, the faint whistle of a distant train echoes across the countryside. How different the world must have seemed from childhood. Railroads now connected cities that once required exhausting journeys by horse. Telegraph wires carried messages almost instantly across vast distances. Electric lights were beginning to replace gas lamps. Photography preserved faces with astonishing accuracy. The 19th century had transformed itself within a single lifetime, and all of those changes somehow felt very far away while standing quietly inside a peaceful bedroom. During especially cold winters, servants sometimes visited bedrooms before dawn simply to rebuild dying fires. So rooms would be comfortable when the family awakened. Imagine the skill required to enter a dark room without disturbing the sleeping occupant. The servant opened the fireplace carefully, arranged fresh coal or wood upon the remaining embers, and patiently encouraged the flames to grow again. Every movement had to remain almost silent. A misplaced piece of coal dropping onto the hearth could wake the entire room. Success meant leaving without the sleeper ever realizing someone had entered. The same careful attention extended throughout the house. Lamps in hallways were adjusted before sunrise. Ashes were removed from fireplaces. Water heated in distant boilers gradually reached bathrooms and washstands. Dining tables were prepared. Newspapers arriving from the city were sorted for different members of the family. Fresh flowers from the greenhouse or gardens replaced those beginning to fade. By the time breakfast approached, the mansion had quietly transformed itself from a sleeping home into an active household once again. Another interesting detail involved the sounds carried through open windows during different times of the year. Early spring mornings often began with robins singing enthusiastically from nearby trees. Summer introduced the steady hum of insects, accompanied by distant birds greeting the sunrise. Autumn brought quieter mornings, with occasional breezes carrying dry leaves across stone paths. Winter could be almost completely silent after heavy snowfall, interrupted only by the crunch of footsteps as gardeners or stable hands crossed the grounds before dawn. Every season composed its own gentle soundtrack, one that became deeply familiar to people living there year after year. Bedrooms overlooking stables experienced another subtle rhythm. Before the household awakened, horses already required attention. Stable workers brushed them, prepared feed, cleaned stalls, and inspected harnesses for the day's travel. These activities produced faint but recognizable sounds drifting across the estate. A horse stamping gently inside its stall, a stable door opening, harness buckles softly clinking together, wheels of a carriage being checked before departure. Such noises formed part of daily life long before the automobile changed transportation forever. Even the gardens contributed to the experience of sleeping in these great houses. Many estates employed gardeners whose work began early to avoid the strongest afternoon heat. From an upstairs window, an early riser might watch them quietly trimming hedges, watering flower beds, sweeping pathways, or collecting flowers destined for vases throughout the mansion. The gardens never truly rested. Every season demanded different care. Spring required planting, summer encouraged constant maintenance, autumn involved clearing leaves and preparing delicate plants for colder weather. Winter focused on protecting trees, greenhouses, and pathways from snow and ice. These outdoor rhythms continued whether guests happened to notice them or not. One cannot overlook the importance of textiles throughout the bedroom. Heavy carpets softened footsteps while helping retain warmth. Thick curtains insulated windows against drafts. Upholstered chairs invited quiet reading before bed. Decorative cushions added comfort as well as elegance. Tablecloths, bedspreads, embroidered linens, and carefully woven rugs represented countless hours of skilled craftsmanship. Every fabric contributed to the room's atmosphere. Without them, the grand architecture might have felt cold and echoing. Instead, bedrooms remained surprisingly intimate, despite their impressive size. Visitors often remarked that the finest bedrooms felt welcoming rather than overwhelming. This balance required careful decoration. Wealth certainly allowed extravagant purchases, yet experienced designers understood that comfort mattered more than simply filling a room with expensive objects. Chairs needed to be placed where morning sunlight reached them. Writing desks belonged near windows with pleasant views. Beds were positioned to benefit from fireplaces during winter while avoiding uncomfortable drafts. Mirrors reflected available light without becoming distracting. Every decision combined beauty with practicality. As another evening approached, and the cycle prepared to begin once more, servants repeated familiar routines almost automatically. Curtains were drawn, fires refreshed, lamps lit, water replaced. Bedrooms quietly transformed into peaceful retreats, awaiting their occupants. Outside, daylight gradually faded across gardens and rooftops. Birds settled into trees. The last carriage of the day rolled beneath the entrance portico. Somewhere inside, dinner conversation drifted through open doors, while the upper floors remained calm and ready for the coming night. Perhaps this repeating rhythm was the true heartbeat of a Gilded Age mansion. Not the grand parties remembered in newspapers, not the famous guests whose names appeared in society columns,